Hello friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with the story of how our OP punished the neighborhood kids for messing up his property. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Revenge is sweet like honey. This is not my story, but I still laugh every time my friend tells it to someone else. My friend's father is a beekeeper and has his bees in a field near our hometown. There are a few unruly kids in the neighborhood, and one day they decided it'd be fun to walk past the hives and knock them all over. Obviously, this would cause damage to the hives and disturb the bees. We had a pretty good idea who the culprits might be, but obviously nothing in our hands to accuse them. The bees were friendly and probably just got confused, but had not stung anyone. However, if you know anything about bees, not all are that friendly. For starters, some tend to get more and more aggressive when they stay in the same hive for several years, but there are also breeds that are less willing to accept disturbances in general. My friend's father bought a new swarm of bees from a different country, the kind you do not mess with because they are seriously aggressive. In fact, he'd get the honey out of all the other hives when it came time to harvest, but left the last hive in the row untouched. Even he did not want to mess with those bees. The honey was not worth it, and the hive was not put there to produce anyway. They were purely there for revenge. As predicted, the neighborhood boys eventually returned. It was a warm summer day when my friend's stepfather discovered that the hives had been knocked over yet again, and the bees were upset, including that last hive in the row. My friend's stepfather calmly put them back up and tended to the damage, then grabbed his car for a calm drive around town. When he passed the house of those unruly kids, they were in the garden, covered in bee stings and looking absolutely miserable. Each of them had angry red bumps all over their faces and arms, smeared with white ointment. According to my friend's father, those angry bees had barely left a patch of exposed skin untouched. It's a small town, and they of course knew whose hives they had knocked over. My friend's stepfather honked, waved at them with a smile, and drove on to do his shopping. The boys looked at him with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. But what could they do? My friend's father was free to keep any breed of bees he wanted, and they'd trespassed and damaged his property, and paid the price for it. Needless to say, no one touched those beehives ever again. And our last story. You want us to work for free? Okay. Grumpy was the manager of a store for a company that sold everything you needed to build a house, from cement and bricks to custom-made cupboards. I started as a loader filling the trucks that were making deliveries. A little background for the company, it's important later. When they started back in the early 1980s, they sold everything you needed to build a brick-and-mortar home wholesale to professionals. During their first expansion, they got a really good reputation for their prices on power tools, custom cupboards, and landscaping, including custom-made garden furniture. The stores were basically big warehouses. In the mid-90s, they opened their doors to the general public, which was accompanied by a rising tent of DIY, skyrocketed their sales. That brought a second, smaller wave of expansion and the opening of the online store, first only with phone orders, then later with a proper site. When I joined, they were doing a third shift on their business plan. They'd cut down on things that weren't big sellers like bricks and concrete, and were focusing more on the big sellers, custom-made furniture, landscaping, tools, and for some weird reason, plumbing. My first 8 months on the job was a dream. Grumpy was an excellent manager. Having started in the company roughly the same age I was and being promoted through the ranks, he developed a very distinct managerial style. His concept was simple. If my employees are happy, they work better and provide better services, which leads to better sales. That meant that while Grumpy managed one of the inner city stores, meaning medium to small size compared to others, we were fourth in revenue nationwide and first in customer happiness. And then the reason for his nickname stroke. While everyone called him Grumpy, a nickname he was kind of proud of, he was far from it. The reason was he had a medical condition that affected his nerves and had left him with a permanent frown on his face. He had declined promotion due to that condition, knowing the extra stress would make his condition flare up, meaning he wouldn't be as effective as he would like. His medical condition flared up unexpectedly, and Grumpy had to be hospitalized and be on sick leave for a time. Headquarters decided to not have one of Grumpy's assistants be an acting manager for the duration, but bring in a regional manager to take over the store for the duration. Let's call him Wilhelm. Wilhelm was the exact opposite of Grumpy. He was younger than Grumpy. He was in his late 20s, Grumpy was in his late 30s, had a business degree, and hadn't worked the floor at all. He was hired from the beginning as an office drone and climbed his way to regional manager. The reason he was put in charge of our store had to do with the change of the business plan of the company. You see, the change of focus had created a lot of empty space in the stores. A supermarket chain had approached the company with an offer to rent the empty space, especially for inner-city stores. The company had accepted and placed regional managers in key stores to help with integration. The thing is, the supermarket chain had a reputation of being bad employers. That was reinforced by one of our tellers who'd worked for them for 3 years before quitting to join us. Wilhelm didn't help also. His managerial style was based in only one concept: make more money in any way possible. He started changing our schedule from monthly to weekly, raising the sales targets to unrealistic heights, and always demanded more. In the first 2 weeks, 6 experienced people had left, 4 quit and 2 fired, and replaced by young, inexperienced people that were easier to manipulate. And then the integration happened. The floor was the first to feel the problem. The supermarket opened its doors and was understaffed. Wilhelm started sending people over to help for 4 to 6 hours, while also demanding to work their regular shifts. If someone declined, he or she was written up. 2 write-ups in 6 months, and you were fired. Then Wilhelm came to lay the law in the loading bay. The loading bay was shared between the 2 stores. Wilhelm declared that we had to first help the 2 guys of the supermarket unload their trucks because their products were perishable, and then start loading our own trucks. That would throw our delivery schedule to the wind. The loading crew worked from 5 o'clock to 1 o'clock. We loaded first the trucks that had longer to travel, so they would be ready to leave at 7 o'clock at the latest. The company had a next-day delivery policy for a 150-mile radius. What Wilhelm declared meant we couldn't start loading our trucks before 7:30, and they couldn't start their route before 9:30. We said as much, but Wilhelm didn't care. He said we had to do both jobs. When someone inquired about overtime, Wilhelm said no. He said we already made too much money with unsocial hours, 5 to 8, and leaving early, so he wouldn't approve overtime. So from a nice environment that you wanted to work for, we all started getting miserable. We lost 10 people in the loading crew in a month because of the new rules. The new hires didn't last long. The floor was a mess also. Started turning personnel faster than a dollar hooker. Anyone who's staying is either looking for another job, is afraid of unemployment, or is too young to know better. The sales had a very small decline, but customer happiness is plummeting fast. After almost 6 months, all the old guard that was left was ready to quit. But our savior came back. Almost 6 months from the day he was hospitalized, Grumpy walks in the store to claim his rightful position. He isn't a knight in shining armor riding a pure white horse carrying a legendary sword. He's in normal attire, slightly limping and holding a cane. We have a welcome back party and have a small glimmer of hope now that he's back. We're informed that Grumpy will be on light duty for 2 weeks before he becomes manager again. Despite Grumpy being back, Wilhelm still remains the regional manager, which means he outranks Grumpy and makes it very clear in private meetings with all of us. If he caught us complaining to Grumpy, we were as good as gone. Still, a few of us are planning to have a meeting with Grumpy after the weeks, letting him get his sea legs back, but another department had other ideas. During his reign of terror, the only department that Wilhelm couldn't control was the workshop. He knew that if he treated them as bad as he did us, they would quit and sales would go from a small decline to bottom of the barrel real quick. As I said, custom-made furniture was the #1 seller. So the head carpenter had a meeting with Grumpy on his second day talking about the future of the workshop. In reality, the guy spilled the beans on Wilhelm. With the pretext of catching up with the changes, Grumpy has meetings with everyone, learning what Wilhelm had done and why we had so many new staff. You could feel he was getting angrier with every meeting. He also had an eye-opening meeting with the manager of the supermarket. Finally, the time had come that he's manager again. The revenge. On his first day back as manager, Grumpy notifies everyone of a mandatory meeting after the store is closed. He has a solution. So gather in the store after closing hours, and Grumpy lays out the plan. For the next couple of days, nobody except him is coming to the store. If anyone calls us, we should direct them to him, which we did when we started getting calls about the store being closed. Grumpy's answer to the headquarters was simple. The staff was working on a second job during their shifts, which is a breach of contract, so I had to fire them all and find new staff. That caught headquarters' attention because nothing of the sort was reported in the last 6 months. They asked Grumpy for evidence, which he happily provided with our written testimonies, which brought a crapstorm on Wilhelm. You see, Wilhelm had an arrangement with the supermarket manager. He got a kickback from our unpaid labor for the supermarket, and manager offered the same thing to Grumpy. He also included that Wilhelm regularly declined to sign overtime, which meant that if any one of us went to the labor department, the company would get a really huge fine. The aftermath. Wilhelm got fired. We all received calls to interview with the company for an open position. We all received severance pay for our firing, plus most of the unpaid overtime, about 80% of it. Almost all of us went back to work with a small pay raise based on experience. The company took a long, hard look at the supermarket chain and distanced themselves from them. They stayed until their lease was over, but no shared employees anymore, and a lot of theirs jumped ship to our side. Next time Grumpy had to take time off, one of his assistants took over. 2 did a stellar job, leading to being promoted to managers in other stores. Grumpy brought back his usual managerial style, leading again to a rise of sales and customer happiness. I left the job 3 years later for a better paying position, but I still remember Grumpy as one of the best managers I ever had. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.